So we're here in Scratch to go through the falling object game. Remember, the falling object game is a game where we have an object that starts at the top of the screen and it falls down to the bottom. While it's falling, we're trying to move a player left or right to get underneath that object and try to catch it. And if we do catch it, we're going to add to the score. If we don't catch it, or if we do catch it, the falling object needs to recycle to the top of the screen and continue falling and return to falling down to the bottom of the screen. So either if we miss it or not, we still need it to go back to the top of the screen. So to begin, we are going to change the name of the game to the falling object game. We always want to give a descriptive name to any program that we create and anything that we create in the program, because we want to know exactly what it is and what it's doing in the game and what its role is in the game. So I'm going to rename this falling object game, and then I'm going to, for right now, get rid of the cat. I don't need the cat for this game. We're going to add a backdrop. I'm going to choose this blue sky backdrop, and then I'm going to add two sprites, one for our falling object. In this case, we're going to use an apple, and then one for what's going to catch, which in this case will be the bowl. And I can arrange these how I want, but it'll be better for me to arrange those using code and putting them where I want. So we'll start with the apple. With the apple, remember, we want it to start at the top of the screen, fall to the bottom. If it hits the bottom or hits the bowl, we need to recycle it back to the top. If it does hit the bowl, we do need to add to the score. Remember that this area, called the stage, is a XY coordinate plane, just like in math. So there is a y-axis here, an x-axis here, and our values for x range from 240 to negative 240. For y, it's 180 to negative 180. So we have a total of 480 by 360 that we can work with. In the case of the apple, we want it to go to some random position at the top of the screen. And one easy way to do that is to jump to a random position, which we can use a go to, and then we would change the y value, so set it to 180. And we want this to happen when the game starts. Whenever we start a program in Scratch, we use the green flag. So we're going to add a when the green flag clicked event on top of that, so that when we click the green flag, we move the apple to the top of the screen somewhere. And if we keep clicking, it'll keep moving in random places. Okay. Once that happens, then we can start falling towards the bottom, which means in motion we're going to change y by some negative number. I'm going to choose -5 for now. We can always change that later if we want. But if we just put it on there once, it's only going to happen once. We need to have it happen multiple times. In fact, we need it to happen unless something else is going on, like we hit the bottom of the screen or we hit the player. Therefore, we're going to use a loop. And all the loops in Scratch are under control. And loops will repeat a set of code for a certain amount of time, whether that's, in the case of a repeat, that's a certain number of times. In a forever block, that's continuously until the program ends. And then a repeat until is it'll continuously repeat until we have some true statement, like until something is true. In this case, because we want the falling object to fall no matter what, we're going to use a forever block. So we're going to add that in and put the change by -5 inside that. Now when we click the green flag, the object actually is falling towards the bottom, but when it hits the bottom, it doesn't do anything. It just stops because it's reached the bottom. So we're going to click stop. In order to make it recycle, I need to check periodically what its y coordinate is, and if its y coordinate is beyond a certain level. Now we're not going to choose necessarily the absolute bottom of the screen. I'm going to actually use a number close to the bottom of the screen. We'll use -170, and that'll be good enough because we'll put our bowl somewhere that will keep it from being able to catch it if it's past the bowl. So I'm going to use an if statement to do that. And I'm using an if because if the apple is not down here at the bottom, I want it to continue falling. I don't have anything that I want it to do if it's not at that point. That would be an if then else. An if then else allows me to not only do something when my condition is true, but also when it's false. In this case, I only want to do something if it's true. I don't want to do anything if it's false. And that's why I'm using an if then. So we're going to check using a less than because we're at near the bottom of the screen. We don't know exactly where we'll be. We might change our speed, and that might affect exactly where the y coordinate is. So if we set a line of negative 170, we're going to check and see is the y position, it's under motion, of the falling object at most 170 or at 170 or closer to the edge of the screen. And if it is, let's do the same thing we did up here and go to a random position and then switch the y coordinate to 180, and that will jump back to the top. And now when we run, it should continuously fall and then jump back to some random position. And there it goes. So now that we've got that working, we're going to go ahead and switch over to the bowl and get it working. With the bowl, we need it to first, let's initialize it at some point. I'm going to put it in the center, and we'll put it near the bottom of the screen. So in this case, I'm going to use a goto with the exact coordinates because I'm going to type in a 0 for x to put it in the middle of the screen and a negative 140 to put it near the bottom. And I'm going to remember to add in a when the green flag is clicked so it will actually move there when the green flag is clicked. Then I need to react when keys are pressed. And we can do that similarly to how we did with the apple. We'll use a forever loop and we'll continuously check to see are we pressing one of those two keys. So we're going to use actually two if statements because if keys aren't being pressed, I don't want to do anything else. And we're going to check under sensing, is one of the two keys pressed? So is the right arrow being pressed or is the left arrow being pressed? And if the right arrow is being pressed, then we're going to change the X by some value. I'll leave it at 10 for now. For the left arrow, we're going to change X by negative 10 instead because that'll move left. So now, when I click the green flag, we have an initial place that our bowl starts, and then we can move the bowl left and right. And right now, nothing happens when the bowl hits the apple because we haven't told the program to do anything when the bowl hits the apple. Okay, so we'll stop there, and we need to actually fix that. So let's go back to the apple because that's kind of the thing that's controlling it. We want to also continuously check, are we touching the bowl? That's using another if statement because again, if we don't want to do anything if we're not hitting the bowl. We just want to keep falling. So if we are hitting the bowl, let's do something, otherwise let's not. And that's what an if then is for. In this case, we're going to use touching, and we're going to change this to bowl. And so if I'm touching the bowl, I need to do the same thing I did earlier and reset, but I also need to add to score. So let's do the reset real quick because we know what to do with that. And then in order to change the score, we of course need a value for score, and that's where variables come in. So we're going to click on data and make a variable. And in programming, a variable is just some number, some thing that stores a value for us, and it'll change throughout the game. So that's why we call it a variable. In this case, we'll call it score. And all variables in all programming languages use two ways to describe the scope, what we call it, which means where in the program can I use this variable. There's one that's called global, which is what for all sprites means in Scratch. It means that I can access it anywhere in the program by any function, whatever in the program. Or we have local, which in Scratch is called for this sprite only. And a local variable can only be accessed in the place that it's been defined. So in our case, because we want the score to be something for everybody, we're going to leave it as for all sprites. And we'll click OK. And now once we do that, we see our score tools here, our score blocks. So now, first thing we need to do, we can go ahead and change score here by 1. It's easy enough to do. But we also need to reset the score to 0 when the game starts. We can do that really anywhere. I'm going to choose to do that though in the back, in the stage, so that I have something in the stage. And it's a good place to do kind of these general things where we set variables, reset them to whatever. So we add a set score to 0 at the beginning of the game so that when we start the game, the score will default to 0, and then we can add on to the score. Now, when we click the green flag and we get the bowl underneath the apple and we touch the apple, the score increases. And then we can just check to make sure that it still doesn't when the apple isn't caught by the bowl. And so we can continue playing, and it looks like everything works fine. Okay. And at this point, we have a working game where we're good to go. You could do things like change the speed of the apple falling, or maybe you change the speed of the apple depending on the score. That can also be done. You can change the speed of the bowl, or you can change the speed of the bowl when you get to a certain score to make it more difficult. You can also add more apples by simply duplicating the apple. You could change backdrops when you reach a certain score to kind of represent levels or things like that. So there's lots of stuff that you could do to enhance this. But at this point, it's a working game, so it's good enough to submit. You don't need to do anything else.